cappuccinos, huh? So what I want to do today is I want to talk about how the future of innovation is decentralized. And this afternoon you will hear about the decentralization of money, the decentralization of systems through the blockchain. And I want to do a little bit of a preview. I want to talk about how innovation itself becomes decentralized. And I believe it ties nicely into what you just heard from my dear friend Ramez. Very briefly, to just talk about what are the three systems of innovation, or the three systems in general we see today. Of course, the first system is what we call centralized systems. You have a core and that radiates out. This is the classic way we build companies. The second way we're seeing today is what we call distributed systems. So distributed systems is you have a core, and that core has some adjacent capabilities. This is your innovation lab if you're thinking about a company. And then lastly, we're moving into this world of decentralization, where the core is actually not a core anymore. You've got flattened hierarchies. And in the world of innovation, this looks like this. This is Thomas Edison, the inventor of the light bulb, and many other things in the world. And what Thomas Edison is the classic example of what we would call centralized innovation. You've got the lone inventor sitting in the middle of a room, coming up with great ideas, and then building organizations around him to disseminate those ideas into the world. We have moved on from this model because this model doesn't scale very well, right? Like, you need to find these lone geniuses. We've moved on to a world where we now run these innovation centers. If you work for a large corporation, you know this really well. We've got these centers at what we call the edge. This is a classic example of a distributed system. Now here's the interesting challenge. Linus Pauling, one of the world's best and most known inventors, once said that if you want to have good ideas, you need to have many ideas. And that's an interesting insight, because it's not about the lone single great idea, it is about having many ideas. And that should make you already frown a little bit. You combine this with work Karim Lakhani did at Harvard Business School, where he did a longitudinal study looking into innovation efforts in large corporations. And what he found is scientific and empirical evidence to figure out that most innovation efforts suffer from a lack of initial variety and a number of approaches. Should make you, if you're in the business of innovation, that should make you go already feel a little uneasy. And you combine this with a sentence which Bill Joy once said. He was the CTO of Sun Microsystems, one of the most innovative computer companies in the world. He said, no matter who you are, most of the smartest people work for someone else. And that, by the way, is universal truth. If you're Google, you employ about 80,000 people. I guarantee you that there's another 80,000 incredibly smart people who happen to work for Apple. There's another 100,000 people who work for Microsoft, and so on. So you bring all these things together, and this is how it should make you feel if you think about innovation. Now, when you think about innovation, what you really want to do is what we call is seeking alpha. When you look at an innovation outcome, innovations fall into like a classic bell-shaped curve. There's a couple of ideas which are terrible. There's a lot of ideas which are okay, they're mediocre, in the middle. And what you want to look for is these extreme outliers. This is where you get to real disruptive innovation. This is the edge. Now the edge, to find the edge, is pretty hard, because we thought for a long time it is about making better ideas, generating better ideas. And we spent all our time, all our efforts, all our energy on creating better ideas. Whereas in reality, it's really about getting more ideas. And this new paradigm, this idea of decentralizing your innovation, is the way to get there. So with that being said, I want to show you 5 approaches to decentralized innovation. And these approaches are kind of stacked in terms of how open they are. So we talk about crowdfunding, we talk about competitions, crowdsourcing, open platforms, and open source. And because I love to tell you stories, I want to tell you 5 stories. I want to tell you a story about bees. I want to tell you a story about snow globes, a really weird-looking car, IKEA, the bane of my existence. If you ever built one of these things, you know exactly what I mean. And of course, because we come from Silicon Valley, we have to talk about computing. So let's start with the first one, and this is crowdfunding. crowdfunding, for those of you who are not in the know, is this idea of you go out into a marketplace and you say, I want to build this product. I want to build this product. You haven't built it yet. And I'm looking for people who are willing to fund this project. This is the classic form of what we call patronage. You remember back in the day, artists did this. They said, I want to write a book. I need someone to pay me some money, so I've got some money to pay my living expenses. And here's an interesting crowdfunding example. Do we have any beekeepers in the room? Anyone who's like, has bees at home? Every once in a while I find someone. It's a weird hobby. Okay, so not, that's cool. So there's a thing called flow. And what flow does is, if you know anything about beekeeping, this is the way we do beekeeping today. So this hasn't evolved over the last millennia. So, you know, like you've got a beehive, the bees bring the honey in, you smoke the bees out, you scrape off the honey. It's a pretty involved process, you get stung. Not particularly nice. A father and son team decided that there must be a better way. So they, over 10 years, perfect a way to do beekeeping better in the world. And they come up with this idea.
Was to take our invention to the world. And crowdfunding allowed us to do that in a way we never dreamt was possible.
So this is pretty cool. This is a little like a beehive, which looks like a little house. And you literally have a tap, like a tap on a beer keg. And you open the tap and the honey comes out. It's a pretty cool idea. And the way you would normally bring this to market is, what do? Like you find someone who gives you some money, like your bank surely will not give you money. So you find like your relatives who give you some money, you produce a few of those things. You put them in a store, you sell them, you take that money, you produce more, you go to trade shows, etc., etc. What these guys did, the two people, father and son, they tried something different. They went to a crowdfunding platform called Indiegogo. And what they did on this platform is, and this is one of the two big platforms, the other one is a site called Kickstarter. They put this item on the platform. They said, like, we want to build this, here's how it looks like, we know it works, and if you want to, you can pre-order it. And the way these sites work is, you typically have a pre-order period, like 30 days, and then you need to set a goal. And the goal is kind of like your base level, where you say, like, if I raise a certain amount of money, then I'm going to produce this. If I don't raise the money, I will not produce it. And that's kind of like a safety measure. So they set the goal, and I saw this live when it happened, at $70,000. And when I saw this happen, I was like, that's a really high number. I mean, you know, how many beekeepers are there in the world? I mean, in this room, nobody actually, you know, raised the hand. Make a pretty wild guess how much money they raised. Any ideas? So $70,000. Like I typically hear people say, like, you know, like they're crazy, they're like $250,000. Then I hear the really crazy ones, they're like $1 million, which is, by the way, it's like there's not that many beekeepers anymore. Well, it turns out they raised $13 million. This is the most funded crowdfunding campaign in history of crowdfunding. They then, this is crazy, so again, like they build a business out of an idea without any inventory, this is pre-sales. Like people giving them money before they actually have produced this item. Then they repeated this with a new version and raised another $14 million. So there clearly is something interesting happening here, right? So the idea of you going out into the marketplace, being able to pre-sell a product and test market demand is a very, very powerful one. So powerful that there is now 450 of these crowdfunding sites all around the world. And in 2017, they raised $34 billion. To give you an idea, it's like the US venture capital industry in Silicon Valley, which is the most active venture capital community in the world, is only $25 billion. So this is already bigger than venture capital. So think about this when you want to bring a product to market. This is an interesting way to activate your future customers. Here's another one. We want to talk about competitions. And I want to talk about these guys. Anyone knows what this is? Doritos? It's a chip made out of corn. It's very tasty and it's very unhealthy. So if you know anything about these Doritos is a company which is part of the PepsiCo empire. And the way you market these things is, we have this sports event called the Super Bowl in the US. And if you know anything about the Super Bowl, it's like one of the largest sports events in the world. It is the most expensive event to advertise at. And the way you advertise at the Super Bowl is, you create a TV spot. You pay an ad agency a lot of money to create this TV spot, because it's really important that you get it right. Then you launch the TV spot. And when the TV spot launches, first of all, you never tell anyone what the TV spot is about beforehand. It's like the big unveil. And then, if you ever watch the Super Bowl, a lot of people watch the Super Bowl just because they want to see the ads, because the ads are so good. And then the other thing which happens at the Super Bowl is the Super Bowl has become a little bit like the Oscars for TV ads. So what happens at the Super Bowl is, we watch these ads, and then the users, the consumers, say, you know, like, this is a great ad, they vote it up. If you get voted up, your ad will become a viral sensation. So the way you do this is, again, like, you pay millions of dollars to even air your ad, you pay more millions of dollars to get your ad produced. The people from Doritos said, not with us anymore. So we do this crazy thing. We create a campaign which we call Crash the Super Bowl. And with Crash the Super Bowl, we go to our community. These are people who eat Doritos. Right? So you can imagine how they look like. So go to them and you say, I want you all to create our ad. And guess what happens? Of course, the ad agency said, like, you can't do this. Because they just, of course, like, they saw their money, like, going away. And despite the ad agency saying this, the people from Doritos said, like, let's do this. We'll try this out. They received 4,000 entries. And by the way, an entry is not just like, you know, a tweet or like a short description. It's a full storyboard. This is a lot of work to create. They get 4,000 entries, and then they ask themselves the question, how do I pick the right entry? Which is hard. And they basically do the other thing, which is unknown. They basically took all the ads, or ads in the making, on a website and say to the community, pick the one you like. Again, you don't talk about your Super Bowl ad normally. So they put them on ad, the community picks them out. They spend about $2.5 million on this. This is about a tenth of what you would normally spend on these ads. An eighth to a tenth. And they received $36 million in free publicity. And here's the killer. They launched this ad, and it knocks off the Budweiser winning streak. Budweiser has won the Best Ad of the Year award for 10 years in a row. So you want to see the ad? Okay, here you go.
Hey man, what's that?
It's my crystal ball.
It looks like a snow globe.
Nah, it's real. Here, watch. Free Doritos at the office today? I think that's a yes! Free Doritos!
Will I finally get that big promotion?
Promotion? Not in your future.
It's pretty good, huh? They repeated this for 10 years. Every year, their ad was one of the top 3 ads. This is crazy. This is how you tap into the power of your community. So here's another idea. So you take this a step further. You say, so here's a competition where you say, like, you know, I want to go out there, you help me build this, and then there's a prize. Crowdsourcing is this idea of I go to my community and I co-create with my community. And I want to show you an interesting thing. Have anyone heard of this company, Local Motors? Okay, a few of you. Local Motors is the most innovative car company on the planet. Way more innovative than Tesla for a very simple reason. Local Motors creates cars by leveraging their community. They came up with this really crazy idea. They wanted to build this car. They said to their community years ago, they said, we want to build the best rally car in the world. And we want to optimize this car for what they called in-air time. Which means when you drive rally and you drive over like a hump and it flies, the car flies, they wanted to optimize the car for that experience, which is bananas. You don't do this. So they went out to the community, they literally set up a web page and said, like, let's co-create this car, let's build this car together. What happened is, within 12 months, they built the car from the ground up. The car didn't exist. If you know anything about building a car, it takes a normal, like a car manufacturer, like a Ford or like a BMW or anyone, it takes a car manufacturer 3 to 5 years to build a car, and it costs them about $3 billion. They do this whole thing in 12 months. They get 40,000 submissions. Experts from all around the world chime in and say, hey, you should build a drivetrain like this, you should put this motor in it, you should put these brakes on it. They spend $3.2 million to develop this. This is 1/1000th of the cost to create a normal car, which also means that they have a break even by only selling 82 of those cars, which is nothing. And then they build this car, which looks like this, which, by the way, I still think it's the most amazing, crazy car you can possibly buy. But then they're doing something interesting. They're not just like saying, okay, so we built this one car. They go out and they build the first 3D printed car in the world a couple of years ago. Again, with the same principle. They go to their community and say, let's co-create this. Let's create this together as a community. So they build this. And then they go a step further, and they build with the same idea, for the same development cost, one of the first fully autonomous self-driving electric buses, which they're now selling. So you can go to Las Vegas and you can actually drive in one of these things. So an interesting way of like, how do you outsource your development? Let's go one step further. So we're talking about now about the idea of what we call open platforms. If you're in software, you know open platforms from what we call APIs, application program interfaces. This is the idea of like you build a piece of software and you allow other people to interact with your software. We've seen this very successfully with companies like Salesforce.com, for example. But we see these open platforms now in other areas popping up as well. Let me show you. This is IKEA. If you don't know IKEA, of course, they make this really beautiful furniture. And the interesting sales point is that they send you the furniture unassembled. It's in a flat pack. It's a little bit like Lego blocks. Now, if you sell the furniture as Lego blocks, some people say, hey, this is interesting because if you send it to me as Legos, I might as well use it and do something different with it. So a community springs up called IKEA hackers. And what they do is, this is really cool, what they do is, they take IKEA furniture and say, how can I modify existing IKEA furniture to do certain things? So they say, for example, let's take this shelf and this plate and this thing here, and we create this new product. And they create products which either are not economically viable for IKEA to produce because there's not enough buyers for this product, it's such a niche product. Or they create products which IKEA has never thought about producing. If you know anything about the latest craziness about standing desks, so for a long time IKEA didn't have a standing desk, and when this notion came up as standing desks, the IKEA hacker community went out and created a standing desk using existing IKEA furniture. They said, like, if you take this desk and you put this shelving unit underneath it and you assemble it in the following way, and they post on their website exact instructions on how to do this, you can create a standing desk. And this became the first very successful IKEA standing desk. It has become so popular that Good Housekeeping, which is the #1 interior design magazine in the United States, is now writing about IKEA hacks. And what does IKEA do, by the way, when they hear about this? The first thing they do is they sue IKEA hacks for copyright infringement. You're like immediately like, what the hell? So I was talking about this at one of our programs at Singularity University, and the head of innovation at IKEA sat in the back. And I used very unfriendly words to describe IKEA's behavior, not knowing that the guy from IKEA is in the back. And we have a chat afterwards, and he comes to me and he's like, I understand what you're saying. You're right. It's our lawyers, as always. It's our lawyers who got in the way. Now, since then, I'm happy to report that IKEA has actually embraced the hacking culture. And what they now do is, in certain test markets, they sell you individual pieces So they go and say, you don't need to buy the whole shelving unit and throw away half of it because you don't need it. You just buy the individual pieces like Lego bricks, and then you can build whatever you want to build. What this allows IKEA to do is they can service a market which they could never service before, because either the markets are too small, too niche, too special, or they haven't even thought about the market. So you take this idea is all, and bring it to the logical extreme. You bring it to what we call open source. Open source comes out of the software industry, but we see it in many other industries now as well. And what you do with open source is you give away the blueprints to your product. And the question becomes, why would you do this? This is crazy. Well, let me show you an example. If you know anything about software, you might have heard about these guys. There's a company called MySQL or MySQL. It's a database product. In 1995, this gentleman here, Monty, created the company. And originally it was just a standard software company. They created a database product and sold the database product to the world. And they did okay, but it's really hard to compete in a market where you have these giants. You had Sybase and Oracle and many other large corporations in this market. So to better compete and to create a different market, in 2000 they come up with a crazy idea. They say, you know what? We give away our software, not just for free, but what we do is we give people the source code to the software. And the reason why they did this is they said, if we give people the source code to the software, two things will happen, likely. One is, people will find bugs in the software. They find problems in the software and they will fix them. So we create the biggest possible testing lab in the world. And the second one is, if we give it away for free, people will add features to it. And there's an ethos in this community to bring back the features to all of them, so that everyone can benefit from it. So they said, like, if we do this, we create the biggest community of people building database products. And then our business model, by the way, is we're not selling you software, of course. What we're selling you is services on top of the software. So we sell you guarantees and uptime and servicing and installation, etc. They do this, their revenue, of course, drops by 80%. It's pretty scary, right? Like you go from you had some revenue and then suddenly your revenue drops because you don't sell your product anymore. The same year, they raised $4 million in venture capital, which is not bad. But then 2 years later, and this is an insight which I have because I know the venture capital firm which funded these guys, they did something incredibly bizarre. They went and said, we need more venture capital. So they went to a company called Index Ventures in London. And they presented a business plan which looks like this. And in this business plan, they make a very interesting assumption. They say, we will permanently change the way software is produced and procured. Because what we're going to do is, if you know anything about venture capital, the way venture capital works is you go into a market and you say, the market is $4 billion, or whatever the number is, and we will capture, let's say, $1 billion of this market. What they said is, the market is $4 billion today. We reduce the market by half because we destroy the economic value in the market and then we capture the remaining half and grow it from there. It's a very interesting, weird way. They received $20 million on that proposal and sold the company a couple years later because they became the dominant software platform for databases in the world to Sun Microsystems for $1 billion in cash. Because they became so quickly, so fast, so big. This is the power which happens when you leverage the community which is around you. So here's your impact. If you went to business school, you know that you can create something which is better, faster, or cheaper. And in business school, they teach you one important thing, which is you can do 2 of those things, you can never do 3. Right? You can do something which is better and faster, but won't be cheaper, etc. With these open source, open ideas, decentralized innovation, you can actually do all 3 at the same time, and it becomes massively disruptive. It also allows you to compete asymmetrically. You can be the tiny little MySQL company competing with Oracle. You can be the tiny little beekeeping organization competing with the largest companies in the world. You don't know what you don't know, but someone in the crowd might. That's an important insight. It's like, we all are experts in something, but there's so much we don't know, which the crowd might know for us. So it's actually really useful to tap into the power of the crowd. And here's the interesting insight. There's something called the 80% adjacency rule. What this rule describes is that when we look at these open innovation systems, 80% of all solutions come from people who are not experts. Let me repeat that. That is really interesting insight. 80% of the solutions to your problems come from people who are not experts. Now, guess who works at your company? Guess who are the people you hire at your company? They're experts. Of course they're experts. So you're missing out on 80% of the possible solution space. And again, remember, it is not about having better ideas, it's about having more ideas to get to alpha. So here's how you do this. It's actually not that hard. The first question you need to answer is the what question. And the what question is, what do you actually want to achieve? So sit down and figure that out. Like, what is it you actually want to achieve with your innovation effort? Is it you want to create a new product? Is it you want to extend a product line? Is it you want to create a new business model, etc.? Once you know that and you're super clear about it, you can ask yourself, like, what is the how? How do you go about this, and what is the mechanism to get there? And again, like the option space is, you can do anything from, it could be crowdsourcing, all the way down to open source. And there's much more in between than I could show you. Once you have that, you need to answer the question of why. And the question of why is not why for you. The question is, why should they care? Like, they being your community. Why should they care? And what's important here is that you put out something which is bigger than you. The reason why Doritos could get people to create an ad for them was not because they went out and said, hey, Dorito users, help us reduce our bill to our ad agency. Of course nobody cares. But if you go out and you say, hey, Dorito users, let's crash the Super Bowl, let's create the best Super Bowl ad which has ever existed on the planet, people follow you. So you have to have something which is bigger than you. This is work which has been done by Karim Lakhani, who investigated together with us over at Mozilla when I was at Mozilla Firefox. Why do people contribute to these projects? And these are the 5 core reasons in order. So it's really about an itch to scratch. It's like someone wants to do this because they want to do it anyway. This is the example of the guys who built the car. Like, if you care about cars, it's so cool to actually work on an actual car. There's a creative process involved. There is belonging, learning, and lastly, reputation. Note that the top 4 reasons are all intrinsic. They're all inside of you. They have nothing to do with money. Once you have that, you need to figure out how do you engage with these people. And the most important thing I can tell you is you have to treat them like citizens. It is not you and the community. It is you and you are the mayor of a community. You just happen to be the people who are at the center of it, but they treat them like citizens. They've got rights. They want to be taken seriously. They want to have information. So treat them like citizens. And then lastly, you have to learn. I think this is, for many organizations, a new muscle to create. So you have to turn your company into a learning organization. It takes time and some iterations. It's not something you do overnight, but it's something which is incredibly rewarding once you get there. And here's a little bit of a warning, a beware. There's 2 things which happen. The first is, if your culture shifts, if you allow your culture to shift from closed to open, from centralized to decentralized, you cannot undo this. I've seen this in organizations before. They changed their culture, they got their people excited, and then for some reason they decided to turn the culture back. And the people left. Because once they have sniffed the air of freedom, you cannot get that genie back into the bottle. And the second one is this. If your competition does this, if your competition decides to become open, decentralized, the competition is over. It's a really hard way to compete in the market if your competition has embraced these open systems. So here's your last points. This is your summary. This is to figure out what do you actually want to achieve and how do you get there? What is the mechanism? Take the why. Why should they care and how do you engage with them? Treat them like citizens. And then very lastly, become a learning organization. Kevin Kelly, I leave you with this quote. Kevin Kelly, who's a futurist out of Silicon Valley, very, very well-respected person, once said that harnessing the sharing of the crowd will often take you further than you think, and it is almost always the best place to start. So with that being said, thank you so much. Thank you for letting me share these ideas. And I believe that our AI overlords have some questions.
You're right, Pascal. Question time. Thank you. There are lots of questions that our audience would like to ask you. The first one is it true that you live in California, you love running, and you will be signing books during the next coffee break?
That is all true, yes.
Perfect. Then, let's go back to the three main questions that crossed your mind during Pascal's speech. What are the typical obstacles one might encounter when an organization becomes more open?
So I think the typical things we see in organizations when they embrace openness is really around culture. Because many organizations have been built on a very strong culture of protecting your IP and being very close and guarding it. And breaking up that cultural cycle is a very tough challenge. So I think you start at culture, and then you follow these 5 ideas I laid out in terms of the questions you want to follow, and I think you're on a good way.
Thank you, Pascal. And when more and more organizations apply this principle and practices, what will become possible and how might it change industries?
I think we're seeing some really interesting trends in organizations becoming more open. A very famous example is, you might have heard of Tesla. Elon Musk at Tesla decided to make all their patents publicly available for a simple reason that he said that I embrace the competition and embrace people like actually pushing the industry forward because it will help the whole industry, it moves the industry forward, and it will ultimately benefit us greatly. And I think when you look at the current developments in terms of technology at Tesla, I think it's exactly what we're seeing. So we see this in more and more industries where people actually say, we take the basis of what this industry is built on and make it a public good so that we can all innovate on a higher level to really create customized solutions for our clients.
Great. The last question. What about IP? How can we deal with that?
This is a classic problem, of course. Like, a lot of you will probably sit here and say, oh my God, like, how do I deal with my IP? And first of all, let me just be clear. There's a lot of reasons why you want to protect your IP, and I'm not propagating or saying that you should all open up your IP completely. There is ways for you to engage in open, in controlled systems where you contain full ownership and proprietary information on your IP. So you could, for example, create a community in a crowdsourcing environment where all the people in the community are bound by an NDA, by contractual obligation towards you. And we see a lot of companies do this. So a good example in the United States, and globally actually, is Procter & Gamble, which engages very actively in the open innovation community, but is a very closed IP carrying organization, and they do this mostly through contractual obligations. So it's totally doable, and again, like, it helps you tap into this 80% adjacency rule.
Thanks a lot, Pascal.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'll see you tonight. Thank you.